Filmmaker Gaspar Noé stated that you feel touched by a movie in a good or a bad way, or you have a strong reaction to something that's totally artificial, to an imitation of life, but that imitation of life that you see on the screen can affect you almost as if it was real. What if there was a movement that took this idea and encapsulated it in a way that completely resisted the supposed limits of cinematic boundaries? The new French Extremity movement emerged in the late 90s to 2000s France, birthed from a time of societal discontent, cultural anxieties and political unrest. Defined by transgressive violence, the nature of pain and questioning of ethics and morality, the movement has been surrounded by controversy due to its provocative and graphic nature, which is rife to explore. However, its legacy is undeniable despite these concerns, and the movement has since been remembered as a moment where filmmakers utilised cinematic mediums, stretching its boundaries to provoke thought and emotional responses that reflected the cultural and political climate. Alexandra West states that France began mad and wild. Despite the glimmering beautifications of its capital city and picturesque landscapes, France has always been a country with blood on its street and hands. At the turn of the millennium, France was brewing with turmoil. Police brutality, xenophobia, unrest and riots were everyday occurrences, and this turbulence was rarely spoken about or confronted outside of news reports. The conservatism of the Chirac government, combined with the social precarity produced by neoliberal reform, fostered a climate of disillusionment and latent anger. Amongst this backdrop, film critic James Quant, in his article Flesh and Blood, Sex and Violence in Recent French Cinema, had introduced the term New French Extremity, referring to the films made by prominent filmmakers such as Gaspar Noé, Claire Denis, and Catherine Breillat. Quant declared New French Extremity as a cinema determined to break every taboo, to wade the rivers of viscera and spumes of sperm, to fill each flame with flesh, nubile and nard, and subject it all to manner of penetration, mutilation, and defilement. He stated that the movements proliferated in the high art environs of a national cinema whose provocations have historically been formal, political, or philosophical, or at their most immoderate, and posed the question of, do these films bespeak a cultural crisis, forcing French filmmakers to respond to the death of the ineluctable, namely French identity, language, ideology, aesthetic forms, with desperate measures? At the time Quant had invented the term, he branded it an art house movement, but he had not yet prepared that the moniker would be taken up by the psychological horror genre. The relationship between art house and horror within the movement was a smooth transition, and the directors who spearheaded the movement, such as Claire Denis with Trouble Every Day and Marina Devan with In My Skin, would go on to make outright horror films to maintain their visions for their films, in keeping with the idealism that began the movement, thus creating art that would be emblematic of the New Extremity movement for the years to follow. Scholars identify that New French Extremity is an important cultural touchstone as the films, especially when infused with the dimensions of the horror genre, reflect and refract the terrors that contemporary society faces. Martyrs, directed by Pascal Laugier and released in 2008, pushes New French Extremity's visceral imagery and confrontation into a philosophical territory that questions suffering and the meaning of pain. Martyrs follows the story of a traumatised young woman, Lucy, as she seeks revenge against the individuals who abducted and tortured her as a child, aided by her friend Anna, who is also a victim of abuse. The film initially appears to follow a conventional revenge narrative before destabilising its expectation and shifting into a profound exploration of suffering and transcendence. Laugier uses repetitive violence and unembellished cinematography to deny the audience any sense of catharsis. The body is rendered as a site of endurance, forcing spectators into a position of discomfort and ethical confrontation, the film presenting pain as both physical and existential. The credits of Martyrs display Super 8 footage of both Anna and Lucy as children, happily frolicking in the sun. In This Is a Sacred Place, the horrific untetherings of Martyrs, Catherine A. Toyer states that the film's preceding hour-and-a-half footage disrupts the innocuous feeling of these final shots. The images of the happy little girls jibe uneasily with the memories of the film's earlier images of Lucy, haunted and driven to brutal murder, and Anna, tortured and skinned alive in a shadowy organisation's quest for authentic martyrdom. The screen goes black, and a dictionary entry for the word martyr appears, but instead of the common usage of the word defined as one who suffers or experiences anguish, the word is derived from the ancient Greek martyros, which means a witness. The organisation that tortures Anna deems her a martyr not because of the pain she endures, but instead because of what she sees beyond the normal realm and outside of the usual experience. Toyer contends that by this definition, it is not difficult to wonder whether the film's viewers are also martyrs, forced to observe the concluding Super 8 footage from the terrible and ruptured perspectives of those who have ourselves already borne witness to the terrible affliction and grief beyond the threshold of our accepted worlds. We, as audience, must witness unfiltered and undiluted the act of martyrdom as a process of repeated, systematic, and terrible destruction of identities and bodies that become throughout the film both the cause and effect of placelessness. The extremity within the film thus becomes an existential inquiry into the limits and meaning of human suffering and the possibility of meaning beyond the physical body. Whilst outlandish, The violence within the film is not gratuitous, but instead reflects pre-existing suffering and ethical questioning, which is the ideology through which the movement was birthed. Here, the extremity operates as existential inquiry, as opposed to mere provocation. Irreversible, directed by Gaspar Noé and released in 2002, serves as a crucial but controversial example of the new French extremity. Gaspar Noé has been coined as the poster boy for French extremity since the premiere of his film over 2 decades ago, and Irreversible is one of the most earliest and prolific examples of the movement. The film is told in reverse chronological order, where every scene of the film is followed by the scene that takes place directly before it, with the story revolving around a man in search for revenge after his girlfriend is brutally assaulted and left for dead. French extremity is largely defined as a cinema of excess due to its graphic nature and gruesome, visceral depictions of violence and assault, and Noé's Irreversible serves as a brutal piece that, arguably, caters towards French extremity's components in a way that renders it the most provocative and illustrative example of the movement. The reverse chronology, disorienting filmmaking techniques like the camera work and music, and long, unflinching takes forces the viewer into trauma, removing narrative comfort that forces spectators to experience the violence temporarily. It's evident that Irreversible, as is the case for most French extremity films, understands the nature of violence and as such embeds this throughout the film. Draven Copeland in Gaspar Noé Career Retrospective Part 1 identifies that this is primarily displayed through the manipulation of time and chronology. He states that even the act of continuing the cycle of senseless violence and revenge for its effect on a loved one doesn't solve the problem but merely amplifies it. One horrific act only leads to another, and so on, until every character but the original perpetrator ends up for the worse. Seeing this topic so expertly conveyed, not despite its extremity but because of it, is truly what sets Noé apart from other filmmakers. Despite how prolific Irreversible is, the controversy surrounding the film has cemented itself in its legacy, and arguably rightfully so. The controversy is due to a scene that involves a prolonged and brutally realistic scene of sexual assault presented in a single, static take. Defenders of the extremity movement claims that the extremity is an intensification of reality, a cinema that insists relentlessly on showing us what austerity feels like from the inside, and perceivably, the scene attempts to embody this ideology. Noé defended his decision on including the scene by stating that rape happens in real life, so why can't it be shown on screen, so people have a clearer vision of it? French New Extremity was born as a response to cultural fears and reality that permeated everyday life, and by this very nature, the films aim to reflect these brutal realities in ways that are, by its very definition, extreme. But the controversy surrounding the scene and the scene itself is where the moral dichotomies and criticism that destabilises the movement is best illustrated. Criticism of the scene, when examining various critical takes, follow a similar consensus. No one needs to see the situations displayed in such an abhorrent and prolonged manner on film. The world is a dark place full of cruel people and crimes like this are committed every day. You don't need to watch a woman get brutally raped and beaten to tell you that for it to be portrayed effectively. There are lots of ways to convey what Noé tried through filmmaking with this nihilistic approach, but this certainly is not one of them. This poses the question of, despite being a movement that is built on extremity, when does it go too far? The criticism regarding Irreversible is indicative of wider criticism regarding the new French extremity movement itself: exploitative, gratuitous, ethically contentious. It's important to contextualise the fact that Irreversible is one of the first and leading examples of French extremity. To use it as an example of the movement going too far risks overlooking the fact the film established the ideological and aesthetic dimensions that define the movement. Having said that, it still serves as an example of the ethical dichotomies that pervade the French extremity. That is, how can a movement that insists on reflecting the extremities and brutalities of life do so in a way that is not gratuitous or ethically contentious without degrading its inherent notion? Or is this argument rendered fruitless by the nature and aim of the movement? Do you think films displaying acts of violence explicitly risks degrading its artistic intent?
Yes.
How so?
I feel like there is a point where you can go from showing, like, I guess, like, acts of violence. It can go from a point of being like, oh, I'm trying to provoke an audience, or I've got like a meaning to this acts of violence, to just shock value and like trying to show something shocking and horrible for the sake of it.
Do you think that this means that French extremity has the possibility to go too far, despite that being the intentions of the movement?
Yes, I do. Because like, I think that you still have to be like tasteful as much as you can with like that subject matter. Like, there's a difference between showing horrible acts of violence or like crimes that happen every day. There's a difference between showing that in an artistic and tasteful manner or a symbolic way, or just showing it for the sake of it and like letting people like just watch something horrible. I get that they're trying to provoke people, but I think there is a point where it's just distasteful.
Martyrs, which came out 6 years after Irreversible, demonstrates an evolution in the movement. Whilst the film is brutal and graphic, the violence is structured within an exploration of suffering, which suggests the extremity can function beyond just provocation and shock value. It's outlandish and physically horrible, but exaggerated in a way that reflects realities and questioning surrounding vulnerability, suffering, and pain, remaining resonant, i.e., its outlandishness reflects reality and the nature of pain by presenting it in an abstract form, as opposed to simply displaying sexual violence as is. Irreversible rejects metaphors in favour of explicitly showing the assault itself, staying true to extremity but risking provocation in a manner that can degrade its artistic intent. While these ethical concerns and questions surrounding New French Extremity remain valid, it's equally important to recognise the movement's legitimacy as a cinematic inquiry. The historical foundations through which the movement was born informed the ideological and aesthetic approach the films impart: brutality, inhumanity, extremity, all a reflection of reality. As such, the films merely follow through with this, forcing us as spectators to confront discomfort and question the limits of cinematic representation, leaving the movement controversial, yet culturally and cinematically significant. While the provocations and questions these films leave us with are open-ended, one question remains relevant. Ultimately, why do we choose to watch such films?